What's going on, y'all? It's your boy Cool Colas here, and you are now tuning into a new episode of the Pro-Black Blurred Kingdom podcast. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking from the cuff a little bit. I'm just giving you all my initial thoughts and somewhat of a low-level review on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Ignore me if you hear sounds in my background, by the way. I am in the process of packing. I'm actually supposed to be going on a trip with my wife. So I'm in the process of trying to get some of my stuff together. So like I said, if you hear some things in the background as I'm kind of shuffling here, ignore it, please. Going back. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is a movie that I am seeing kind of late. And it's because I just had a lot of stuff going on. I wanted to review it when it first came out, but I just didn't get that opportunity. So I'll tell you all about my movie experience, like actually going to the movie theater. And then I'll tell you all about the actual movie and some of my thoughts around it. So the first thing is, and I think I've said this on at least a few different podcast episodes, I cannot stand being in the movie theater with a lot of people. Some of y'all like the experience of being with people and hearing their reactions and hearing them laugh when certain things are funny or make noise when certain things happen, or, you know, that type of thing. Like, you all like the idea of how the audience sometimes kind of captivates and even to a certain extent sways the way that the movie feels while you're there. See, I don't like to be swayed like that because I like to be focused when I watch some of these movies. I want to enjoy it, but it's hard for me now to turn off that lens where I'm analyzing this movie to see what's actually happening, or is there any negative tropes and things like that, because I see that so much in these different movies that I watch. And so, you know, when people are laughing and crying and snotting and all types of shit when you're watching these movies, it kind of changes it a little bit, because to some extent, like, it's a big influence. You have a lot of people around you and stuff like that. So that's one part of why I don't like it. The other part is that I just kind of like it to be chill. I like to be in a movie where there's not a lot of people. I don't really care for a whole bunch of random people that I don't know. I like being there by myself or with just a few people or whatever, and I can enjoy the movie, get my own take on it, and I don't hear a bunch of noise. I don't hear all these damn babies crying and their stupid ass parents who chose to bring them. I don't have to hear just a bunch of stuff that I wouldn't necessarily have to hear if I was in the comfort of my own home trying to watch a movie, because I'm more of that type of dude. I'm more of like a guy who's a homebody. I like to kind of kick back and look at stuff kind of either by myself or with, you know, somebody I care about. I'm like that, more of that type. I don't really like that big theater scene type of thing. Just literally has never been my type of thing. Anyway, so I'm at the movies. Not a lot of people at this movie theater, which, again, that was kind of my vibe. I was cool with that. And I sat at the top, my wife and I did, and we watched the movie. Now, when this movie came on, before it came on, I'll say, I didn't really have a whole lot of expectations of it being bad per se. And the reason why is because out of all the Marvel series that I've seen, Guardians of the Galaxy is one of the most consistently good. So I actually thought that, you know, it was going to be pretty good going in. The only thing that gave me any sort of doubt was the fact that the Marvel movies as of late have been a bunch of bullshit. A lot of the Marvel movies that you see, especially in Phase 4, have been full of a lot of agendas and tropes, and they've had very bad story writing or pretty bad story writing. It was a lot of compensating for, you know, lacking in a lot of places. So what I mean by that is they have this tendency in a lot of these movies to add a bunch of humor to literally every single movie when that's not even fucking necessary. And then they throw in nostalgia, they throw in all these bells and whistles, and they throw in good actors and actresses who can body these roles, and they do all these very interesting things. And then they do all that to compensate for the fact that they're trying to push some type of agenda, they're trying to portray some type of negative trope, or they just have a terrible storyline and they want to compensate for that. And I've seen that in many of these movies. For example, Spider-Man No Way Home was one movie where this happened, in my opinion, very much so. Everybody loves Spider-Man No Way Home, but I thought the movie was overrated. The storyline to me left some room to be desired. It just straight up did. It wasn't really that great. But everybody was dazzled by the fact that you had all three Spider-Man characters that have portrayed Peter Parker. You know, you had Matt Murdock in Daredevil, and you had all these little nostalgic pieces that seemed to come out as well too, and reminders from other movies of things that happened and all this other stuff. And then you even had some of your old villains from all different annuities that all kind of showed up in one space. And so most people were looking like, man, this was cool. Like, because of the fact that you had all of that. And then, you know, there was the death of Aunt May. So they do these little things in these movies. And y'all need to really start paying attention to this shit, too. They do a lot of these things in these movies to be able to captivate you. And that garners them some points because it compensates for the fact that they really didn't give you that great of a story. They just basically reminded you that, hey, nigga, we know that you missed this person, so here they are. Give us a couple more points for how good this is. That's what they do. Basically, what Marvel does is they take a box, they take a shit in it, and then they put the top on the box, they wrap it in a pretty bow, they throw glitter on it, and they give it to you, and they say, here you go, and you smile like a kid on Christmas. That's basically how it goes. Anyway, so with this movie, that is the only reserve that I potentially had. But even that, to me, I felt like, I don't know, I just felt like it wasn't really going to be a thing the same way that some of these other movies have been. It's just, for one, you know, the whole laughing and jokey thing, that's something that Guardians of the Galaxy has always been. And the way that the movie was even set up, or from what I've seen, it was probably going to be that same way to a certain extent as well, too. So I was okay with the comedy in this movie because I thought that it was well timed and I thought that it made sense for what it was that we were watching. So I was cool with it, basically, is what I'm getting at. I was cool with it. But the only thing that I really had even any type of reserve for was the fact that maybe the storyline might not be good or it might be janky. The other layer to all this too that I think we need to add here is that I had heard from other people beforehand. Nobody spoiled it for me, thank God. Thank God I don't have morons like that no more around me where they'll tell you what the fuck happened in a movie just to be funny, like that shit is funny and they just look like a bunch of damn goofballs. But, you know, I heard from people, like the short end from people, that the movie was pretty good. I heard it was pretty good. And I was like, okay, so I'm a little more optimistic because the people I heard it was good from were sources that I actually trust. Now, I still wanted to get my opinion for myself, you know, but I kind of had a good feeling about it. And I will say that I watched this movie all the way through and I was right. I mean, this movie was very good. I had to just say, too, out of all three installments of the Guardians of the Galaxy series, this was definitely the best. I mean, they all were good, don't get me wrong, but this was actually the best. This was the let's go out with a bang project out of all of the Guardians of the Galaxy projects. I feel like this was James Gunn's way of saying, hey, look, I know I'm going out, but I'm gonna go out full force and we about to make sure that this movie is that shit. And that's what he did. I mean, he definitely delivered. I can't lie. He delivered. It was a great movie. Very, very, very good. And I got to tell you all what I liked about it. I got to tell you all what I didn't like about it. So the things that I liked about this movie were the action was good. The comedy, like the comedic timing, I thought was good. And I actually thought that there were some moments where I actually was laughing in the movie. Like I thought it was actually pretty funny. I thought that the storyline was very well done. Another thing, as far as the good things goes with the Guardians of the Galaxy movie, I like the fact that there were no visible tropes and agendas when you watch this movie. That I can't believe we're at this point where we have to say that, but there were no visible or very concerning tropes that I saw from watching this movie, and that was a huge plus. Another thing that I also liked about this movie, because some people had issues with it, the Adam Warlock character. The Adam Warlock character, a lot of people have issues, at least from what I've seen with him, because of the fact that this character was not as strong as he should have been. And they pumped this character up like crazy. But a lot of people felt like he probably was a little weak, but I kind of was all right with it because of the fact that, you know, he was essentially like a prototype of what he really should have been. I mean, this dude should have been a monster. He should have been the dude who literally took down Thanos, and he kind of was, I mean, he was giving it to him at first in the very beginning, but it kind of felt like after a while he was just totally weakened. And again, I want to make it clear that I think he was a prototype, and that's why I was okay with like the portrayal of the character, like whether that was Guardians of the Galaxy or whether that was in Avengers. Like, he should have been portrayed like at that point, but he wasn't. So that wasn't this movie's fault, though, in my opinion. But I think one thing that we need to look at, of course, is the fact that they buffed this guy up so much, so everybody probably wanted him to be, you know, coming out with a damn bang. But the issue, that was an issue with the movie. That was an issue with the fact that he wasn't portrayed in previous movies. I also like the idea that Adam Warlock was turned, and he was turned in a way that made a lot of sense, because basically dude killed his mama, so he was like, oh no, I can't be rocking with the High Evolutionary after all that. So I think that they did a marvelous job in portraying all of that. The other thing that I really liked, it was the whole backstory of Rocket. I mean, that backstory was so dark, so sad, but it was just so phenomenally done. Like, I really just felt for this dude the whole damn movie. I mean, like, he was basically just out for the count for most of the movie, and they explained his backstory little by little as they went through the movie, and they paced it just very, very well. Like, that shit was just so well done. I was ecstatic that they did such a good job in presenting his backstory after like keeping that hidden from us for 2 different series that we saw of this actual movie. And it was just sad. They killed off his animal friends. This dude was just a straight psychopath. Like, the High Evolutionary literally was killing the animals. He was shooting them. He was torturing Rocket. He did all this shit. He experimented on him just when he was a little raccoon. He did bad shit to him and all this other stuff. The Rocket storyline was good. Even had your boy feeling a little emotional after, you know, hearing the damn story. I was like, damn, they ain't have to do that to the raccoon and them other animals. I was a little emotional, I ain't gonna lie. But they did kind of get me on that one. But regardless, though, I thought that it was a great movie, I thought, because it just did everything pretty right without me having like any real serious gripes about the way that it was portrayed. It just played on my heartstrings, but at the same time, like, I kind of knew that they were trying to tell a very good story here, and I was just impressed. I was impressed by the way that they did it. I thought that the villain was phenomenal. Not only was the villain phenomenal, the actor who played the villain, who played the High Evolutionary, he did an excellent job. That brother bodied that role. That is what we need when we say, hey, bring us a compelling villain that we can get behind and we can really say, hey, this brother is cool or this person is cool. That is a brother who I thought did a marvelous job on portraying the High Evolutionary. I was very, very impressed. Matter of fact, I'm surprised he's not getting talked about more because it was very, very good. The way that he portrayed that role might have been my favorite part of the movie, but there were a lot of, you know, other really good things about this movie. You know, I thought that they did a good job for the most part of setting up the direction that the characters were going in. They ended it without having to do the cliche thing of doing a big death to make everybody want to part ways or something like that. They made a good job and a good effort of showing how each character was going a different path and what those paths looked like. They set up well what a new Guardians of the Galaxy group would look like. Now, obviously, there's some things that I wish were different. I think that Drax as a character is just nerfed real heavily. He's basically comic relief, but, you know, I still like the way that Batista kind of did the role. Like, I always like how he does the role. I thought it was overall just a good movie that I just don't really have a whole lot of bad things to say, you know. I thought that they did a good job of giving a small or slight tribute to the Yondu character. That was cool. I thought that it was cool how they showed to the difference between the Gamora in the past and this new Gamora. That was pretty cool as well too, because it's almost like it's always this thing of Star-Lord trying to make her open up. That seems to be like a recurring theme, you know, with the Star-Lord and Gamora dynamic, which I thought was very interesting. Those are the things I really liked about it. Now let's talk about the things that I thought were kind of weird about it. So there's 3 things that I want to touch on. The first thing is something that the movie itself didn't do, but something that kind of made me tilt my head a little bit, like just before the movie even started, was the fact that they race swapped the High Evolutionary. Y'all need to understand, race swaps are not a good thing. They are not a good symbol of positive representation for blacks in media. This is not a win, and I need people to understand that. Now, some people see it as blacks are getting visibility, blacks are getting money, blacks are getting the ability to shine, and I understand all that. But what we need to understand is that by race swapping characters, you're basically buying into the pacifying that white supremacists do. Like, they're pacifying you and saying, like, here's a token gesture. We put you in the movie. Be happy with that. And we don't have to settle for that, is what I'm saying to y'all. We can create our own characters, and we don't have to have them have some type of lineage or some type of attachment, connection to whiteness or white characters. We do not have to do that. And realistically, I think the psychology here is you have to understand that this is not a sign that, quote unquote, things are changing. Because a lot of people go into things are changing because, look, they're giving, you know, they always say they're giving African Americans different roles. Like, that's not what's happening. What they're doing is they're trying to meet a diversity quota. They check off a box because they say, hey, guess what? We showed black people. That means that we are diverse. That's what they do. And so what that does is it kind of excludes them from having to be accused of racism. So it's like, no, you can't call us racist because, look, we portray blacks, or as they say, people of color. So we can't be racist because look how we are. We treat people of color very well because we put them in roles and they become big movie stars. And what they do is they put it back on you and they say, well, it's up to you to be able to body and basically get a hold of these different opportunities that we have thrown at other people who obviously have worked for them and you didn't. So instead of creating it and making it be a disparity where they're exploiting black people and they're trying to pit black people against other black people, they'll make it a thing of some black people just didn't work hard enough and some did get there. So in other words, instead of it being an issue of racism, it's an issue of you being lazy and not getting the roles that other black people were able to get. So race swaps kind of set the tone for that to become a thing. That's the first thing they do. The second thing they do is they basically tell black people to a certain extent, although these characters are black, this is our shit and we can do whatever the fuck we want. They're kind of putting it in your face and they're kind of arrogantly saying that, you know, when these companies, they race swap, they do that typically. The other thing that they do with these race swaps is they tend to do reverse repackaging. What I mean by that is a lot of times, not every time, but a lot of times what they do is they'll have a character who is a race swapped character, meaning they were originally white, but now they're black. And in some cases, some other races, but let's just stick to black right now. A lot of times that character that they basically created that was white was already repackaged in the first place. So in other words, they actually took some type of elements or some type of inspiration from something that was related to black people. And they created their white characters based on taking that inspiration. Meaning, in other words, it's that idea started out as black. And then they turned it into a white idea. And then they turned around and race swapped that white idea that they had and now made it black again. That's why I call it reverse repackaging. It's like basically telling this form of indoctrination because it makes black folks believe that they are getting opportunities that they didn't have before, things that white people created, when essentially what it is that white people scalped these ideas from other cultures and then turned it into their own thing, then told you that theirs was the original when they race swapped your characters into black characters. That's generally how it goes and how it works. And I think people need to really understand that and get a good grasp on that. I'm kind of going off on a tangent here to a certain extent. They race swap a lot of these characters, and they do that for a specific reason. They're not just doing it just because. White folks have never, as a whole, never cared about the prosperity of blacks. They've never atoned for their sins and never done anything. So why would you be so quick to believe that they were doing that when they race swap a character and quote unquote give blacks opportunities to be able to shine and to thrive? That's just not a thing. The second issue that I had with the movie is kind of minor. I felt like with Star-Lord kind of being like their central, in my opinion, leader, I felt like they kind of just threw together his path and where he was going. I felt like the movie obviously focused on Rocket more than really any of the other Guardians of the Galaxy, and it was to prepare him to be the leader. And I get that. I totally get that. I'm not trying to take away from that. But I feel like Star-Lord and kind of bringing up his grandpa and all this other stuff, that was really random to me. I felt like there was something more neat. I don't know if it was more that was needed from him, or I just expected it to kind of go in a different direction. And I'm going to be honest with you, I can't tell you how I would expect it to go in a different direction. I just felt like the grandpa angle was kind of like, I don't know, it was just kind of randomly just thrown in there, and it just totally didn't really gel with me for real, is all I'm trying to get at. I don't know, I feel like something different should have happened, something more detailed should have happened, and it didn't. And if I can think about what that is, I'll definitely come back to y'all and I'll let y'all know what that is and how I would have envisioned that a little bit differently. But I don't know, something about that just didn't really sit right or seem right, and it felt kind of like just thrown together at the last minute to give him something to kind of go to, because it's like, now, what they try to do basically is saying everybody in his life leaves him, and that's kind of where they were going with it, and I understand that. They were going with everybody in his life leaves him, and he's trying to find somebody or some connection to whoever he has left in his life. And my thing is like, well, they're saying his grandpa is 90 and all this other stuff, and if you look at the way that it went, at least the big picture, his granddad's like 90 something. I mean, he about to lose him too. His grandpa is already old. So, I don't know. I just felt like if they were going to go with that route, because that's obviously where they were going with the character, they should have maybe focused on him trying to have something else with this new Gamora or something. Because the whole thing that they were trying to push to was that he had lost Gamora because of Thanos. But my thing is, you do have this new Gamora, but maybe like push it to see if they're going to become an item themselves as well, too, just like he was with the old Gamora. But I get it. They wanted to differentiate. I don't know. I just feel like it was kind of thrown together a little bit because they had so much emphasis on Rocket in this third continuation. So those are two things I wanted to talk about that were a little bit on the heavier criticisms. Now, my last criticism is something that I probably won't get a lot of camaraderie on with this, but I don't really care. This is something that I saw, and this is something I just kind of want to throw in the ears of people who actually saw the movie and kind of resonate with my content and see where I might be going with this. So at this point in the episode, I'm putting the tinfoil Kufi on. The tinfoil Kufi is going very strong. It's stapled to your boy's head, and I don't think it's moving. So, yeah, is it just weird that the High Evolutionary, and this is going back to the race swap thing, that he was race swapped to be a black character, although in the comics he was originally white. And the way that they were trying to portray his behavior, what he was trying to do, and how that relates to him being race swapped. So in other words, I know that sounded confusing. Let me kind of like clear it up a little bit for y'all. They made the High Evolutionary kind of psychotic, or very psychotic, not kind of, very psychotic. He had a lot of high highs and a lot of low lows. And he would always yell and scream at the animals that he had experimented on and his own allies and all this other stuff. So what they basically did was they made him seem like he was a maniac and a monster and all this other stuff, which he was, right? And they made him black. And it seemed like his whole goal was for him to try to change the future or change the present so that it was better. So he had seen all the disparities. And I think they even said something like that to a certain extent. He had saw like how unfair the world was as far as like the discrimination and stuff like that. I don't know if he used discrimination, but he used a term similar to that. And he was talking about all the disparities that were going on in the world and all the inequalities. I think he may have said inequalities and all the injustices and all the imperfections that were going on in the world. To me, that was somewhat of a colloquialism for racism and racial injustices, and the fact that he was trying to perfect, because they kept talking about him perfecting this world, perfect an imperfect world. And so it just kind of to me felt like this was the story of a black man who was trying to make the world a better place, because of the fact that he wanted to put in machines and advanced technology and to try to enhance the minds of animals and things like that. So there's a couple things going on here. So I'm going to try my best to tackle each part and kind of untangle the wires here. So it felt like this was a story that was told from the eyes of the white supremacists about black people and twisting their narratives while also trying to put their own. It was through the eyes of the white supremacists, and they were trying to negatively portray the ideals and the goals of black society and black people, and what they were trying to do and what they would do to try to quote unquote make a better world without racism. And then it also took what they themselves would do and it put it onto like black people per se. So in other words, the High Evolutionary was seen as a person who wanted to create systemic equality, and he wanted to just make a more quote unquote perfect world where there weren't all of these issues that were happening because of all of these disparities. And so instead of allowing black people to basically look sensible for wanting to get rid of systemic racism, what they're basically doing is making it seem like, look at them, they're maniacs. Look how they're going about it. They're just going to destroy the world and they're going to hurt people in the process. Look at them. They hurt animals. They hurt children. They capture children. They do bad things, and that's why they have the children there. So all these things are symbolic, right? These are all things that the white supremacists would and are absolutely doing. So, a lot of times they work in half-truths. They tell you what they will do, but then they project it onto black people as if that's what we would do if we had a certain level of power. So in other words, they also tell the truth about our intellect. They tell the truth about how smart and capable we as black people can be. And they also kind of tell the truth about the fact that people will turn on them, specifically white people. Because notice, the High Evolutionary didn't have no black people who turned on him. All the people who turned on him were white. And the reason why is because they were trying to portray that these different white people, these different white civilians and other helpers who are around this black person are good white people who, are just trying to do what they need to do. And black people are basically the ones who are going to use their technology and intelligence to terrorize the world. So what they did was they had all these different white people turn on the High Evolutionary. That's why all his allies and people like that had turned on him, because what they're basically saying is black people are going to be maniacs. Look at this angry, manic Negro. He is basically a technological genius, but he's out here basically exploiting, disrespecting, and bullying and harassing the people who work for him and even the people he's experimented on and mentored. He treats them like trash. He treats us like trash, so we should just turn on this nigga. Because usually when you have like a megalomaniac like that and somebody who has who's like an intellectual villain, usually their cronies don't really turn on them. If anything, they turn on their cronies first. And they just start slaughtering their cronies here and there. So he didn't really slaughter his allies. He was just doing bad shit to those animals. And what happened was his allies actually turned on him. But whenever there's a white megalomaniac, that typically doesn't really happen. It's not usually they all turn on him from the inside. Usually they're all loyal and to some extent fearful of what that person may do. So these people, they had no qualms about basically saying we all gonna turn on this nigga right now. So it's a way to basically say if black people were in charge, they would be manic, savage beasts who would basically do bad things to children and animals, the people who are the most harmless, or the people who should not be attacked the most, in order to make a better world for themselves. So in other words, it's some form of drapetomania to some extent. It's basically saying that black men, and black people in general, but especially black men, have a mental illness for wanting to escape colonization. Because really, High Evolutionary's goal in order to make a quote-unquote perfect world was simply a symbolic reference to getting rid of systemic racism. And essentially, them basically making him seem like he was a maniac and like he was psychotic was a way to make it seem like black people are psychotic for wanting to make like a change in a world that is totally messed up and is totally racist and is ruled and governed by white supremacy. And so that's kind of what it felt like with that portrayal. And I would also back up and support my claim by looking at something that Rocket had said to High Evolutionary right before they defeated him. He said, "You didn't want a perfect world. You just didn't like the one that was there." And what that told me was that was a way, and it was interesting that they did that little slick thing there. That told me that they were kind of, in a way, making light of blacks who, in my opinion, were just, and I guess High Evolutionary was a symbolic reference to blacks who wanted some form of equity in the world that they live in, racial equity. And I think that the reason why they had High Evolutionary be race swapped is to kind of craft these messages. Because if you see a black person who's talking about wanting to make the world better and they seem to go to what looks like quote unquote extreme measures to do so, then they're treated as if they have some form of mental illness because of the way that they're going about it. So what I'm trying to get you all to connect here is that the High Evolutionary was a black man. He was portrayed as a black man because he was portrayed as an individual who wanted to eliminate racism. And the white supremacists wanted to make it seem like they were maniacs in wanting to do that because they were hurting animals and children and people like that in the process. And so the issue was that they're people who would do exactly what they do. What the white supremacist does is they do all that stuff. They capture children and they experiment and do weird things with animals and inject them with shit and do all these weird hybridizations and all types. They do shit like that. And then what they're doing is saying that that's what black people would do if they're trying to make a more perfect world, quote unquote. But essentially, what it is they're just showing what they would do, and they're projecting that if black people were in power, they would do exactly what we do, which that's not even our get up. We've never been about that. We've been a peaceful people, and you can even see that because after all the things that they've done to us, we still are not really full on attacking them, and we're really not attacking them at all. You don't see the common crimes of black people going out and harming white people because they know that we're in a system of white supremacy. And, we're part of the reason they know that we're in a system of white supremacy. And they're not going to basically get far doing, crimes to white people. And then the other part of it, too, is that they also have some type of desire for white acceptance despite all the things that have been done to us by the white supremacists. So my personal opinion, I think that this was a way to project that. It also was a way to insult black people to a certain extent, too, to say that they're animalistic and that they are basically trying to, in so many words, act in an animalistic way, and animals themselves can outsmart them because they themselves really aren't that brilliant like they think they are. And so I think those are all kind of messages that they put in the movie. And you all really need to pay attention to these movies because they do stuff like that. They portray these messages and they portray these images because they know that if anybody tries to dispute them, they're going to look crazy or they're going to look weird. And they put them in there because it kind of trains you to think that way. So, we start playing onto false equivalencies and stuff like that because we see a lot of these images. And I feel like this movie kind of did that to a certain extent, and I peeped that. That's all I'm kind of getting at. I'm hoping that explanation made sense to you all, but that's essentially what I'm kind of getting at and what I kind of noticed. But anyway, y'all, those are my thoughts. The only thing that I want to say is if I had to give it a final rating right now, as far as it being a movie and how it performed, I probably would have given it somewhere around an 8.5 or a 9, maybe like kind of closer to like the level of a 9 out of 10 if I had to. I thought that it was great. I thought that it had few problems, but I did notice those kind of few things that I think people should kind of take a look at. Anyway, y'all, I hope y'all enjoyed this episode. I hope that you learned something from what I had to say. I'm about to go finish up doing the stuff that I'm doing right now, and I will talk to y'all later. Peace.